Hey guys, this is Eric Vento. Welcome to another episode and podcast of Government to Private, where we explore different perspectives and journeys from people who have successfully made the transition from the government to the private. And this could be law enforcement, military, intelligence community, teachers, anyone who has worked in the public sector and has now transitioned over to the other side. With us tonight is Vince Jung. Vince and I have known each other for several years by now, and he is an awesome guy. I've actually been looking forward to this conversation for a while now, just because as you meet a lot of different people through networking and ACES and other organizations, you're privileged to build relationships with them. But unless you are blessed with money and time to go to all these different conferences, you rarely get to see each other in person, and Vince and I have actually never met in person before, but we hope to change that here soon. So,
Yes.
Vince, welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for being with us tonight.
Thank you so much for having me on. I really, really appreciate it. And it's been very exciting. As I was saying to you before we joined this, I had to get my butt home, rush, because I was really excited to sit there and talk to you about this. I did the whole 15 minutes beforehand, check to make sure the camera works and all this kind of stuff. So I'm very stoked that you invited me. I'm very happy to be here. Appreciate you.
Absolutely, man. And I appreciate you making sure everything works too. There's nothing worse than getting on and figuring out, oh man, I need to update my Zoom. I need to restart my computer or something like that. So
Exactly.
awesome, man. Well, hey, I know you come from a law enforcement background. You're based up in Canada. So can you give us a bit of a high level overview of your history?
Yeah, so I started out in policing in '99. Joined a municipal police force. I think at that time it was probably the second largest police force in Ontario, in the province that I live in. At that time it was maybe like 1,600 officers. We bordered Toronto, and just super duper fun. We were single officer, units going out there. We didn't have partners, anything like that. So it was definitely, hey, throw you out to the wolves. But man, I learned so much, the camaraderie, and just learning how to talk to people, and being scared, like real scared in many, many instances, and just kind of shaking your head and like, wow, I actually survived that. You've been there, you know exactly what I'm talking about. I
Yeah.
sit back now, and sometimes you have conversations with your kids and they kind of look at you. You did what, daddy? I'm like, sorry, filter was
Whoa,
off
whoa,
for a
whoa.
second. Yeah. Time out. All right, pretend you just wiped that from your mind. But so I did that for a number of years. I worked in a couple of specialized units while I was in there, and then one of my buddies actually jumped over from Peel to the RCMP, which is our federal police force, and he was telling me about some of the investigations that he was involved in. Really just big, impactful investigations, really taking down some big organizations versus your individual type of thing. And he was like, hey, what do you think? So I went ahead and jumped over in 2005. So I joined the RCMP in '05, did some drug work, some federal enforcement. And then my last 8 years, I worked in a covert unit, and I did that for, yeah, like I said, about 8 years, and realized that, man, it's time. I thought I was going to do this for the rest of my days, but then probably about maybe 15, 16 years in, I started to kind of scratch my head, and I knew a lot of guys and gals that were kind of getting out, and some of them were just, how do you try to be diplomatic about it, but they were just angry at the world. You know how it is. We spend 95% of our time dealing with like a 2% of the population, and of that 2% is, they're not the nicest people. And then you think the whole world is like that. Well, it's not like
Mm.
that, actually, right? So I just didn't want to kind of go out like that. And I started realizing, I think there's other things out there. And I just took off that kind of those blue blinders where you're just looking for the next promotion, and realized that there's a whole another world out there. And then I was like, wow, there's more money to be made. The hours are better. I don't got to worry about getting killed all day long.
Yeah.
I got stuck with a needle when I was working in uniform, literally right before like a big event for me, and end up sitting on that AIDS cocktail for 30 days. I'm fine now for the world out there, but it wasn't fun. So anyway, I'm rambling.
No, no, not at all. So, once you got that thought in your head and you started thinking about, okay, it's time for me to go, what did you do to start preparing for that transition?
The thing that you're brilliant at, networking, really, because I didn't know, I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. I really didn't know. So I started just kind of, hey, what do you do? Hey, what do you do? Just literally randomly talking to people. Oh, you're a librarian. Oh, no, that's not what I want to do. Oh, you work in loss prevention. No, that's not really my jam either. And then that's, cyber, IT. I kind of just really talk to people and kind of tell me what your whole day is like.
Yeah,
Like when you go Monday to
absolutely.
Friday. Yeah, because you don't know, tell me all the worst things. Tell me the great things. Like, tell me what the pay's like. Because you don't want to, I mean, sure, there's lots of things I want to do. I like to pet puppies all day long, but you got bills to pay too, you know what I mean? So that's when I kind of started going down that path. And then I started looking at my own skill sets and some of the stuff that I was really, I'm a big kind of a nerdy tech guy. I was big into open source investigations type stuff before it even really became a mainstream thing. It was something that I had already been doing just for my previous line of work. And there was a tech company here in the city that I live in. They kind of were looking for a person, and there was a connection made. And the head of HR said, "Hey, listen, if you're looking to get out, we've got something for you. This is what you would be doing." And it was literally the perfect nexus and transition using my law enforcement skills in the tech industry into the corporate space, if you want to call it. And then that landed me to in the position that I'm currently in now. Anyway, I'm rambling again.
No, no, no. I love it. It's like when you're interviewing someone in law enforcement and they start rambling.
Yeah,
The ramble, you get so much good information out of that ramble. Because it's not people who are trying to really be specific. They're just throwing out all this random information, but you get a lot of great stuff out of it in a lot
yeah.
of cases. And um, this is the same is true here. So I heard two things in your so-called ramble is one, you talked about the informational interviews. That's something I tell every single person I talk to on a daily basis because they're like, well, beyond a resume and beyond a LinkedIn and all that other stuff, what other stuff should I do that maybe doesn't cost any money?
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, it's going to cost you time, but informational interviews. Just make a list of, hey, here are the companies I want to work for, or maybe here are the jobs that sound super interesting. And then let's get you in front of those people who do that on a daily basis. And you can understand whether to be potentially a fit for you.
Yeah.
And that's the only way that you can find that stuff out, just because in law enforcement, as you well know, you know, the various ranks, they're all pretty similar. Like the only thing that's going to change is the scope and complexity of what you do. And the corporate world is very, very similar.
Yeah.
You could be an investigator for one company and handle a very, very narrow section of the business, and then be an investigator for another company and have all these different pillars underneath you. And so you won't know what is out there and what everything consists of until you start having those conversations with people who have not only transitioned out before you, but also who are in those roles.
Yeah.
Asking them, hey, what does your day to day consist of?
Yeah.
Do you like where you are? Do you like the culture? Do you like the environment? And as you get additional information, hopefully, that enables you to make a more well-informed decision about what you truly want to focus on.
Exactly. You literally hit the nail right on the head there. Um, I feel people have to be really open to listening.
Yeah.
Um, I'm sure you've had this guys and gals ask you this, hey, Eric, you've got a really good job now. Looks like the pay is good, the hours are good and stuff like that. I've got 25 years in and I'm ready to retire and I just want to coast and take another second job. Hey, bro, sis, love ya. Would love to get you into the world, but when you go to this type of a level of corporate, you're not coasting.
Yeah.
It's you don't sit there and just collect your paycheck. We are a cost center. Physical security is almost always a cost center, and all you do is take money for them because you don't see the tangible things that we do to make sure that the business is able to run, making sure access control is good, CCTV is good, crisis management plans are in place, business continuity is in place. Buddy, I can ramble when you're traveling across to sign these $100 million contracts. Travel security is good, project security is good. That's us, that's all us. But you don't actually see what we're doing, but we're doing
Yeah.
it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So nothing happens for 4 or 5 years. Let's just cut some money from the security sector because everything's fine. And no, it's because you've been pumping money into us to allow us to do what we need to do to support your business. So you can't want to transition and just coast and collect double pension. No,
Yeah, I always like, I don't know, like I always like when a major incident hits the news, they're like, maybe it's a cybersecurity breach or even like an insider threat case or something like that. Always my first question is, okay, what did they cut?
Yep.
And maybe that's a little bit too cynical sometimes, because a lot of times, like, the bad guys, they only have to get it right once.
Yeah.
We have to get it right every single time, and so sometimes they get lucky. Sometimes they do their due diligence, they do their research, and they're very targeted in how they approach the threat vector,
Yeah.
but a lot of times it's because the company was like, well, we're spending X amount of money on security every year, and security is this all encompassing bucket, you know, and we're just going to take, $5 or $10 million from it. And then we don't have as much coverage as we used to,
Yeah.
and things just fall through the cracks.
Yep.
And that's the same for every organization. Every organization has to come to the conclusion of what do we want to focus on? We have a limited budget, we have limited headcount. What is our risk tolerance?
Yes.
You know, and ultimately something's going to be at the bottom.
Yeah.
And you just need to be aware that okay, if we have an incident, we know it's coming, and we
Yeah.
know why.
Yeah.
We need to be ready to explain that to our board and our executives about, hey, we put this at the bottom, and here's why.
Yes.
And sorry in advance. You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah. It's like once something goes sideways, all of a sudden it's like, hey, Eric, how much money you need? You know what? Depending on what actually happened, sometimes it's going to take years to recover, if it's even recoverable, right?
yeah,
And I find I'm not a guy that waves, look what I did, look what I did. Oh, look what I did. That's not me. I've never been like that. But I've had to really kind of adjust, because in order to sell yourself up to your point, the managing board and to the CEOs, and say, hey, this is what security did. This is what corporate security did here. This is how we added value, because you need to do that to ensure you stay afloat and collect your paycheck every 2 weeks as well, right? And just to keep the organization safe. So that's one of the things I have definitely had to kind of shift. Being that guy who just doesn't want to talk about it, to now not being like a boastful ass about it, but just being
sure.
humble enough to get your point across and say, hey, listen, this is what happened, and this is what we did, and this is how this is how it's going to be beneficial to you continuing to fund our group, right?
Absolutely. I mean, 5 years ago, which sounds like a long time, but it really wasn't. 5 years ago, security was this black hole,
Yeah.
that we threw everything into, and we never really had to come up with ROI. And now security is not only a cost center, as you alluded to earlier, but it's something that we consistently have to sell,
Yes.
and, you know, um, that's something that a lot of people aren't used to, you
Yep.
know, but being able to articulate that in
Yes.
terms that executives can understand is the exact same thing that I have to do every day from a resume writing perspective.
Yep.
Is how do I take the information that I have and put it into a language that anyone can understand and appreciate? And so if you're in security, one of the first things that you have to figure out is, okay, what do my executives care about? And then how can I take my scope of work or my remit and put our successes and our wins, or even, this is what's going to happen if I don't get this, into terms and language that my executives can appreciate from a risk perspective,
Right.
you know? And I see a lot of guys who they get into these roles and they're either unwilling or unable to do that. And then, they wonder, okay, well, why did my scope just melt away?
Yeah.
And yeah, it's just something to definitely keep in mind.
Well, I mean, to your point there, and I feel like, at least for me, I like talking to people, and that really helped my police career, because I just enjoy talking to people. It doesn't matter where you come from or whatever; it makes no difference. I just like talking to people, because I don't know. It's free. It's my time, and you learn so much. You become more wise, you become more humble just by talking to people. And I learned a lot of that skill set from my policing days, and which was easily transferable to exactly to what you said. You got to listen to your CO. What's his or her or their pain point, and you gotta play into that, because if you don't, you're gonna get axed. You're constantly
Yeah,
gonna get axed. So the same stuff we learn in doing interviews, interrogations. What did they teach you, right? You sit there and listen. You gotta you know what you're trying to do, but you gotta sit there and listen. You gotta use the key phrases and the buzzwords to get it out and sell your point. It's the same thing. It's except that you're not putting someone in jail. That's the difference.
Yeah, big difference there, brother.
Yeah, it's like
So when kind of circling back to your transition from RCMP over into the tech world,
yeah.
you know your first year at Media Sonar, what surprised you about the transition? Like, what did you have trouble with? Being in a corporate environment for the first time.
Rules. Yeah, I don't know. It literally, I know it sounds weird, but in law enforcement, there's really strict rules, man. Like you don't deviate. There's not that much gray. It's like, either you're 20 over or you weren't, right? I found that in the corporate world, there was a lot of stuff that went on. I'm like, can you do that? That seems like weird. And they're like, yeah, you can do that as part of the business practice. I'm like, oh, okay. So it was a lot of learning about like when they're doing bidding and stuff like that. I always thought it was weird that they would have vendor nights and invite all their vendors and feed them all this kind of stuff. I'm like, that's not, you can't do that. And they're like, hell yeah, you can do that. That's part of you know part of it. I was like, oh shit. I was like, okay, well, I didn't know, right? So a lot of that type of those small little nuances, it took a little bit of time to kind of get used to and kind of take off that Boy Scout hat.
Right.
And I'm not saying anybody's dirty or anything like that. We're not
Sure.
like that. We have compliance and we're very rigid, but just some of those things that I thought were not cool. I'll give you an instance, a small thing. Someone gave me tickets to a basketball game. I'm like, oh, I can't accept that. They're like, yeah, you can. I'm like, no, I can't. And then I talked to my regional officer, and he's like, Vince, you're not a cop anymore. You're allowed to go to the game. I'm like, are you sure? He's like, yes. Do you want me to send you an email? I'm like, okay. He's like, I'm gonna slap you. Like, come on. It's kind of weird stuff like that. But anyway.
Man, I couldn't agree more. When I left law enforcement, I thought so. I still do to some degree, but I was so black and white in
Yes.
how I thought about things. And, my wife, she still gives me crap about it to the day. She's like, you need to stop thinking so black and white about this. You need to like start thinking in the gray. And, you know, that can be a really difficult mindset to transition out of,
Yes.
especially when you're so used to this rigid line and, everything comes back to integrity,
Yeah.
and if you're, if you're weaving over the line, like you're in a car or something like that, you're like, oh, my integrity is at risk,
Yeah.
and I think a lot of it is, again, understanding the environment that you're in, that the rules have changed.
Yes.
And as long as you're asking maybe your people manager or, whoever the compliance officer is, or whoever the security guy is in your organization, like, hey, is this legit?
Yeah.
Or like as you go through these different scenarios and these different examples, and as time passes, you'll gradually start to understand what is acceptable and what is not.
Yeah.
Which is why we have to take these gobs and gobs of boring training every year, on compliance and AML and all that stuff,
Yeah.
because of situations just like you described,
Yeah.
because there was someone who, you know, didn't follow those rules. And, we want to ensure that, especially as we're dealing with vendors and procurement and all the different rules that are associated with that, that you're behaving in an ethical manner. And
Exactly.
so I couldn't agree more. And I definitely hear that from guys all the time about, like, I don't know how to behave, sometimes. And um, I just tell them, you got to take it a day at a time.
Yeah. And
Like this.
talk to folks, talk to other people.
Yeah.
You know, if you're not cool with it, bounce it off. I'd pick up the phone, Eric, man. Hey, okay, I know I'm sane, but I just want to be doubly ensure that I'm sane. So here's the scenario. What do you think? And that's okay. Like this is what the whole network thing is all about. Find some trusted sources and ask them. There's nothing wrong with that. Be humble, man. You don't got to know it all. That's all I got to say.
Yeah.
It's okay to.
Absolutely.
Yep. Right.
Yeah. So did you have guys that you leaned on during your transition?
A few. So there was one guy that left policing maybe 2 or 3 years before me. So I had a lot of conversations with him. I'm like, are you sure you're leaving some like stability and guaranteed paycheck, pension, A, B, C, D, F, G? Like, what did you think? And repeatedly, he was like, buddy, it's the best thing I did in my entire universe. Money's better, family life is better. I make more money than you, and I only got to show up 8 to 4. And I'm like, hold on, really? Yeah. No worry about getting shot. No worry about just dealing with stupidness. It's so much better for your mental health. And I was like, wow. I go, tell me something bad. He's just like, bro, seriously, man, there's nothing bad. I'm like, come on, get back to me in a few days. There's got to be something bad. And in 2 days, he gets back to me. He's like, yeah, I do. I miss the lights and sirens, driving like an ass, and stuff like that. I'm like, oh yeah, I can forego that any day. That's what you can pay $200, go on the track, and you can drive like an ass all you want, right? You don't gotta worry about getting shot doing that either, right? So
Yeah,
yeah,
I definitely empathize with that. I see a marked unit like probably like every 2 minutes of my day, and I'm like, oh, I miss doing that.
yeah,
You know,
yeah,
but I also don't miss getting paid $50,000 to, run code every 30 seconds to someone else who needs my help.
yeah,
You know, and you know, um, I always thought that I would be a lifer.
yeah,
I thought for sure 30, 40 years, I'm gonna, be that old head, who's skulking down the road with his Sam Brown, like, okay, like all I need is my flashlight and my, my wooden baton,
yeah.
and that's not what life had in store,
No,
So, a lot of times when I'm talking with people, especially if they're at the executive level, because executives seem to have a little bit harder time with this, is setting expectations,
yes,
because, you know, they seem to have particular trouble with, oh, I've done all this body of work. It should be relatively simple for me to land a job in the private sector,
no,
and I'm like, well, you could be a unicorn.
yeah,
You could like apply to that job right out of the gate and you get the job, but you're going to be in the minority for sure because most of the time it's going to take you 3, 6, maybe 9 months to land a job, and that's if you're pounding the pavement and you're doing everything well, you're doing it consistently, etc. And that's just really hard for some people to hear because they've spent their entire career just kicking butt and taking names,
yeah,
and you know they're like, well, why wouldn't someone want this?
mhm,
And I'm like, no, they do, but they have a lot more other people to pick from too,
yeah.
and so
And
um
like to your point, and this is not to, you know, not relish in the careers of people who were way up there, like chief superintendents and superintendents, like the high ranking folks. But I find some of those folks sometimes are the hardest to transition. They're used to having 100, 300, 400 folks work underneath them. They made all the ultimate decisions, A, B, C, D, F, G. And when you transition over to corporate, no matter where you fit on the security food chain, there's still a CEO, there's still a CFO, there's still general counsel, and they're all above you. And you got to eat some humble pie to know that you ain't making that decision.
yeah,
And sometimes,
absolutely.
right, it's very hard for them to kind of take off that, in policing, I was this high. I'm sorry, you're not in policing anymore. You're with our
Yeah.
organization and you're going to be respected, but I'm the boss, not you. Right. So sometimes it's hard for them to take that hat off.
And then again, that kind of like where we circle back to those informational interviews
Yeah.
is, there's only a limited number of hours in a day. And especially if you're still working your job while you're trying to transition, you have even less. And
Yeah.
so, from an informational interview perspective, it's just not about throwing your line out there and seeing who you can connect with. You want to connect with people who have been where you are,
Yeah.
preferably at the same level that you've been at, because the context that they're going to have about, well, this is the exact same issue that I experienced is going to be a little bit more likely than just talking with anyone that you can,
Yeah. Agreed.
and so, whether it's a chief or it's a senior executive in federal law enforcement or whoever you're talking about, you're always going to have, not always, you're more than likely going to have a more accurate picture of the transition process because not only are you talking with someone who comes from the same industry, but also the same job title.
Yeah,
You
agreed.
know,
No,
you know, all
I like that idea about the info sessions. I think I did it, so
yeah. And again, it's just like, it's the same thing in the corporate world when you're thinking about, going into a different job, or in law enforcement. What did we do when we wanted to go to another agency? We did a ride along,
yeah,
or we went and chatted with someone there and said, hey, what am I stepping into here?
exactly.
It looks all bright and shining on the outside, but is this a toxic hellhole on the inside?
Yeah,
We all want to step into a good place,
yes,
and the reason why we have all these informational interviews is to give us the information that we need to make a more informed decision.
yeah.
So now that you've been in the corporate world for, what is it, like 5 years now?
Since 2017. So what are we
Okay,
now?
yeah,
Six, five,
well,
six,
five,
yeah,
6 years.
yeah, yeah.
All right. So, what advice would you have for people who are in the transition process now or considering something similar?
So okay, well, I'm a big believer in. You said something earlier. You said maybe 5, 6 years ago, security was one big bucket. There's cybersecurity, there's IT security, there's physical security, there's investigations. Get a flavor of all of that, especially if you're trying to go into my world of the corporate security world. Have a pretty good understanding of cyber. I'm not asking you to become a cyber practitioner and do digital forensic. I'm not asking you to do any of this stuff, but have an understanding of what cyber does and how cyber and physical are literally, before they used to be two big silos. Nope, not anymore. We are fully conjoined together. One holds the hand of the other, and vice versa. You can have a server room fully locked down, best IT security in the entire universe. But if you've got the door to the server room locked with a padlock, which is the physical security side, you tell me how good that is. Someone cracks the lock, walks in there, full access, unfettered access to your server. So I always use that as an analogy when I'm talking to people. Really understand what the cyber is like, have an idea what physical is like. Be open, be like a sponge. You don't know what you don't know. Just talk to as many people, gather the information, and be open to really just really listening. It's hard when we're law enforcement where we just literally you got your head on, you got your blinders on, and call the call, blah blah blah. You don't know how to take that stuff off, right? Talk to use resources like you, like guys and gals that you're going to trust that are going to tell you exactly like it is. Not every day is perfect. I love the organization that I work for. I was saying to you earlier, fantastic organization, great boss, really good, amazing CEO, really great opportunities to do things and shape things. But of course, there's crappy days too. It is what it is. But I'm not going to only tell you how that it's all roses. I'm going to tell you there's some days there's poop, and
Right.
that's just the way it is, right? Um, Biggest thing is don't expect that you're going to retire, October 1, and then you're going to find a job. To your point, by October 31st. At least maybe 2 years beforehand, you better start planning, do training, join organizations, you know, take off the government hat and start putting on the civilian hat so that you can start talking that talk instead of talking the hey, it's all you know what I mean, like.
Right.
So anyway, and just be open to listening. Just take off any kind of barriers and just sit back and have some guy or gal or somebody else tell you what's what and ingest it, right?
Yeah. I always think about it, from a law enforcement perspective because that's my background. But it's like, what did you do to prepare for being a cop? You went to school, maybe you studied criminal justice, maybe you did, maybe you studied something completely different, but you started getting in shape. You went to an academy for, 6 to 9 months, depending on what it was. And then you took, at minimum 40 hours, if not hundreds of hours more on an annual basis to stay abreast of everything. It's the same thing in the corporate world.
Yeah,
Like you have to prepare for this,
yeah,
and if you don't prepare for it and you happen to get lucky and you land yourself a job, you're still going to have to get up to speed really, really quickly,
yeah,
and you know that can be something that's really hard to grasp because departments around the globe do a really, really poor job of preparing their people for life after law enforcement.
yeah.
And when people leave or they retire, or maybe they start looking 6 to 9 months beforehand, they start to realize the enormity of the task that they are facing.
Yes.
And it can be really overwhelming.
Yeah, absolutely. But you know what? I find that lots of law enforcement folks that we know, like in the corporate world, and I'm sure you've experienced this as well, is like, oh my gosh, Eric, this has happened. Oh my God, what are you gonna do? What are we gonna do? We've seen dead people. We've responded to guns, and we're like, hey, anybody dying? We're like, right now? No. Anybody bodily harm, imminent bodily harm? No. So they kind of
Yeah,
look to us, and we're
it's
always,
okay.
yeah, we're always that calm kind of figure. Or at least I know within my organization, I'm just like, hey, it's a piece of paper. It's going to get signed. Maybe not right away, but it'll get signed by tomorrow. It's okay. The world is not on fire. And then
Right.
they're, and those are really good transferable skills that we kind of learned because we had to be like that. What have you been to a call where you're like, oh my God, what am I gonna do? What am I gonna do? You're not gonna walk into a call doing that. Automatically, you turn on that game face and you're calm. And you can bring that over to the corporal. Think about the stuff that you already know and bring that over to the corporate world, but you don't know what's in the corporate world until they talk to people like you, talk to people like
Yeah,
me, and say, hey, this is a transferable skill, which is why I think what you do is it's awesome. It's amazing service for the guys and gals that are trying to transition out. Because as I was saying to you, it's sad to see people who spend 25, 30 years in an agency, and when they come out, they're just angry at the world. You don't like to see that, right? So
yeah,
if it's time
absolutely.
to get out. So anyway.
Awesome, man. Well, anything else that you have to say? Any other words of wisdom?
No, I got no wisdom. What are you talking about? You picked the wrong dude, man. I don't know what you're thinking of. No, I got nothing. Like there's lots of people who always reach out. And sometimes it's a right fit to kind of have that conversation, and sometimes it's not. Like, recently someone said, hey, I'm a developer. Can I talk to you? I'm not a developer, and I don't really think and you don't want to be rude, but if you talk to every person every single time, you're not going to have any time for yourself and just to kind of, de-stress. If I have something to contribute, I'm more than happy to sit down and chat with you. But if it's something that's like, hey, I want to be a cook, I don't know. I mean, I can use a microwave. Like, I got nothing to contribute. Like, what the hell, right? So, but I'm always happy to chat with people. If there's something
Yeah,
I can do, that's great. If not, I can at least point you in the right direction, send them over to you, or whatever that offers a better service, right? So,
absolutely. Well, Vince, thank you so much for volunteering to be
absolutely.
here and just share your story. I have no doubt that it's going to resonate with a lot of people, and just really appreciate your time.
Absolutely, brother. Appreciate you. Thank you so much. And we'll see you in my neck of the woods soon.
Sounds good, man. Be safe. Have a good night. Okay.
Okay, brother. Thanks,
All
man.
right.
Take
Bye.
care.